Okay, we are live. This is the Annex, a sociology podcast. I'm Joseph Cohen from Queens College in the City University of New York. Today, we're going to talk about the weaponization of culture, the practice of producing cultural content that's intended to harm, disrupt, or have any type of otherwise negative social effects. And for the discussion, we have two experts who have recently published work on the various ways that state actors weaponize culture, and both have written on Russian trolls in particular, but there's more to it. Ori Swed from Texas Tech University and Dana Weinberg from the City University of New York. We're going to talk about internet trolls, national security, and a lot more coming up. It's not a new practice, information warfare. I mean, it's probably as old as warfare itself. And when we think about influence operations, those of us who are old enough to remember the Cold War probably think about things like blasting Voice of America into East Germany, or, talks about the Red Scare and so forth. Now, my understanding is Voice of America still exists, but maybe this is your grandfather's propaganda. Information warfare has evolved in the area of the internet, and we have two great guests to explain how. First, Professor Dana Weinberg, sociology at the City University of New York, Queens College. Dana influences research operations with the U.S. Department of Defense, and she recently published From Anti-Vaxxer Moms to Militiamen, Influence Operations, Narrative Weaponization, and the Fracturing of the American Identity with Jessica Dawson of West Point, and that was in Brookings. Welcome, and thank you for joining us, Dana Weinberg.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And next, Ori Swed from Texas Tech University. He recently published Mapping the Internet Troll Network on Twitter using a predictive model. Ori, you're gonna have to correct me, with Shahith Desayanka and Dmitry Volchanov. Did I do that all right?
First, thank you for having me here. And it's Shahith Desayanka and Dmitry Volchanov, but very close.
All right. I knew I was going to blow it. Now, Ori's working on a book with a great title, The Disinformation Machine, a postmortem of the 2016 Russian Information Operation Network. Thank you very much for joining us, Ori. It's great to have you.
Well, it's an honor. Thank you.
So I thought for both of you, why don't we start off by going over the basics? What are internet trolls? Like, what do they do? What's trolling about? Ori, do you want to start us off with that?
That's actually a great question, because when we think about internet trolls, we think about this mischievous kind of behavior that can be annoying or funny. Sometimes it has this political tone in it, but the type of trolling that we are looking at are more nefarious. They take this type of activity and weaponize it. They use the same kind of practices to promote external agendas.
Dana, anything?
I would just add to that you can think about, we talk about trolling kind of in an informal way. Somebody posts a comment about something and it's negative or it's funny and it undermines whatever was there before. But the difference with the influence operation trolls is that it's concerted action. So they're working together for a particular purpose, and they may be coming from different kinds of accounts. It could even be one person behind several different accounts, or it could be a group of people working together. But it's a coordinated effort in some ways to shape the conversation and move it in a certain direction.
What are they trying to?
Right. Yeah, sorry, it's absolutely right. In that case, we're talking about state-led operation that weaponize that activity of the trolling to promote an agenda, that benefit the state. And they can take any type of topic that regular trolls talks about, like the new Star Wars, and figure out what people are upset about, weaponize it in a way that promotes an external agenda. It's very bizarre, but very sophisticated kind of tool.
Ori, what are they trying to do exactly? Like, what's the agenda? What's the goal with these trolls? What are they trying to do to us?
It depends on the operation. It's essentially it's a tool, and that tool is supposed to achieve particular goal. And we have a lot of different actors with different methods and different type of approach. We have Russian trolls that they probably the most known and probably the most effective. We have Chinese, we have internet trolls that are from Venezuela, from Turkey, from Israel, and each one try to promote something different. And with each operation, they try to achieve particular goal. It's not that, okay, so let's run this big operation and we have the same goal all the time. It's a complementing tool to other measures. And sometimes it's very narrow, sometimes it's broad, but includes many small little operations. So it's not dry and cut and dry, one item fit it all.
Right, but as Ori said, the Russian trolls and the Russian influence operation, especially on Twitter, has probably been the most studied. And congressional testimony pointed out that their goal was to sow discord and undermine our trust in American institutions. But beyond that, if you look back at it's a page out of old Soviet doctrine about how to approach an enemy and to, undermine them by, looking for seeds of conflict and creating what we might call a useful idiot or, somewhat an insider threat, people inside who then turn against the system and actually are doing what the Soviets would have wanted them to do without any additional prompting. So, we become their puppets in a way, and these are the sort of active measures. So this is, old Soviet doctrine, but the Russians are still using the same playbook, and now they've used it for the digital era.
So wait, to clarify, with the Russian trolls, what they're trying to do is turn us against each other. They're trying to rev us up so that we start fighting each other, and the idea is to harm unity and sow internal discord in their geopolitical enemies.
Yes, and in our analysis, we looked at how they used military narratives on Twitter. And, we found that they were preparing Americans for armed domestic conflict and trying to turn us against the government.
Wow. What other goals have you seen? Or you said they do all sorts of things. Like what goals have you seen them pursue?
It varies. So the Discord. So in Discord and in the case of intervention around elections, they try to create distrust in institution, in democratic process. They try to influence election outcomes. They try to influence narratives and perception related to Russia and what Russia is doing. So it depends on the operation, depends on the goal. But if and I agree completely with what Dana said, but and I want to build on what you said about the Soviet approach and take it a step back. There is a great piece by Thomas Timothy on the Russian reflexive control theory.
Right, reflexive control. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that theory essentially, it's you can describe it as the Soviet parallel to game theory that allows you to manipulate actors and figure out what is the best outcome in a situation. Now, it's a binary model. You, instead of allowing actors to have a lot of options and then they can go into different directions, you create a situation where the decision is either pro or against. You corral the audience into those opposing perspectives, and then it's easier for you to manipulate them. And you can shape their perception in a way, it's easier for you to create and shape their perception in a way that they will choose the reality or the action or the decision that seems to them the best one, but essentially it's the one that fits your goals and your needs. So it's a very sophisticated kind of approach. And it's in a nutshell, that's very, very complicated approach and philosophy. But we see that applied the trolling, in the Russian trolling, because they try to create those two camps, influence the way that they see one another, bombard them with those messages that force them to pick the best option, and I'm putting air quotes, the best option, as they can see, but in fact they're serving the agenda of those who create the narrative, those who create the polarization.
So like when we go online, when we react to inflammatory information and we go online thinking that it's an us versus them or a good versus evil fight, and we fight hard, are we like basically doing the job that they intend for us to do, these trolls? Like, is that like that's what they want us to do, basically?
I mean, that could definitely be the case. And it's a very rich ecosystem that they have around all of this. So it's not just these fake accounts that are, now posting and pretending to be, different people with these messages. It's also a whole media ecosystem. So you think about the YouTube links and the Instagram links and the news links, even for real articles. They seed the ground, with things that go back years. And then, when there's the opportunity now to go back and dig it up, they pull those stories in addition to the news stories. And all of a sudden you're looking at what seems like evidence about the thing that's going on around you. So it's a very deep operation in the sense that it's not just that there's someone, typing a comment on social media and trying to sway you. It's that all of a sudden it looks like there's a whole bunch of people around you with the same comment. And here's all of this sort of, external proof text, if you will, that also then bolsters whatever this opinion is that's supposed to put you in motion. And then even more than that, what our team has been looking at is the nature of the way that these messages are shaped to get maximum emotional impact from us to then move us to action.
Wait, there's two things that I want. First of all, the emotional impact. Like, what do they do concretely to like rev us up like that?
So we're looking at narrative and how they use it. And so, for example, one of the biggest narratives that we're finding is government betrayal, right? And almost all of us have reasons that we might not completely trust the government. But now if you play it up, it's this idea that the government has betrayed people in the past, the government will betray you in the future. And then we move toward they're coming for you, they're coming for your guns, they're coming for your family, whatever it might be that makes you feel something in that threat space. And then there's the call to action. So it might be voting for a particular candidate, it might be stockpiling guns, it might be showing up at a rally, whatever that might be, but it's pulling on this very deep narrative that we can all relate to of this potential for government betrayal. And our country is built on this in a way because, right, our founding is about turning against one government in order to self-govern. So,
Ori, what have you seen of techniques, like ways that people use to rile up listeners or viewers?
So again, this is a great question. So one of the things that we study in my lab, the Peace, War, and Social Conflict lab, is that we go through 100,000 now of tweets that identify, associate with Russian trolls in the context of since 2014 until now, and we see how they weaponize social rift. We see how they weaponize biases, trying to create, to expand the biases, to build on the stereotypes, the fear of the other, and create the us versus them, ridicule the other, make the other more scary. They take toxic terms like terrorist and assign it to political rival, to other groups. This is in the context of if it's catering for the right wing, it's many times around Islamophobia. The terrorist is always a Muslim. If it's for left-wing audience, the terrorist is always a white supremacist.
Or Black Lives Matter. They played on that one as well.
Most definitely. So they target sub audiences. They build on the features that social media provide us, that they can look at data, they can look at trend, they can look at engagement, they can figure out geolocation, use the features in Facebook and Twitter or other types of social media that can target specific audience, if it's Black, between those ages and so, and you can target them with specific messaging that cater to their fears.
Wait, they use like the same things that social media use to find out what we're interested in and what they like. They sort of micro target us, like they keep databases of what we like and what we think, and they try to feed us tailored messages that play to our personal fears or biases. Is that what you're saying?
So yes, this is what I'm saying. But when we look at the genealogy of the Russian troll operation, it started very simple, very dumb. It was bizarre, not that effective. But over time, they learned how to manage those projects better, to collect data, and to use the tools that every company uses to target us and our preferences. But their product is fear. Their product is us versus them. And through that, they create those narratives. Now, going back to what Dana said, we're talking about ecosystem that includes YouTube, Facebook. Back then it was Tumblr. They even created a Pokemon Go kind of initiative. They create video games, and that ecosystem that they send you from one to another, they try to lure you in, and suddenly when you're in, you see a lot of friends or people, but all of them are fake because you're in that network that tells you how reality is, and you are getting convinced. They even have protocols for fake arguments where you have three trolls or three personas, that one presents the right idea, the other one presents the criticism on the right idea, again air quotes, and there is a debate, and that debate can reflect debates in that are common in society. Then a third person come and decide the debate by supporting the right kind of approach, while offering a photo and a link, and the link takes you to another fake account, and that's protocol. That is not. It's not that someone it's a protocol of the troll.
So wait, is that when Dana, when you were talking about seeding operations, that's what that is? So for example, I'll plant a news story saying Republicans love guns, and then I'll just wait for a school shooting, and then my operations will point to that old article. Is that the type of thing that you were talking about with
yes,
seeding?
That's exactly it. And they don't always know what's going to blow up later or become viral, but now they have this opportunity with all of this archive of content that they've created. And then, as Ori said, they also have these links to other accounts. So now and in addition to that, there's the retweeting and the liking and the other things that gives more visibility. More visibility and credence to other messages that are out there. And it doesn't all have to be the Russian messages. They can find other people who are talking about the things in the way that they want, and they can amplify those as well. So, what ends up getting in front of people, and then what also gets shut down because people are trolling on it and trying to discredit it. So there's a whole set of maneuvers that they do around this. And Kathleen Carley at University of Pittsburgh does a lot of, at Carnegie Mellon does a lot of work on this in this area. I wanted to go back to the micro-targeting for a moment, though, because there's another aspect of this, and there's a couple of different pieces of it. But you can think about influence operations the way we think about marketing campaigns in a lot of ways, right? There's a huge number of similarities. Nike is selling us some sneakers, and they want us to go out and buy them. And that's not necessarily different, even though it's incredibly different than, if the Russians want us to go have a protest, right?
Right.
They're still trying to influence us to take a certain kind of action. And definitely they can use the information that's available through the platforms on us. Those platforms have a lot of private information about what our interests are, and it works in multiple different ways. So on Facebook, not only can they target us because we've liked something in the past, or we're in some particular group that shows an affinity, or, because we've bought books on Kindle or whatever it might be, right? But they also have groups there. So one of the ways when I started working on this is we had read the Vietnam Veterans of America report, where they were actually posing as the Vietnam Veterans of America. And the way that the VVA discovered this was because they were trying to do fundraising And they saw a group that looked like them that was doing a better job than they were. So they reached out to them to find out what they were doing. And then that's how they discovered it was the Russians. But what would happen is you'd have, people who were supporters of the Vietnam Veterans of America would sign up for this group. It would become part of their algorithm, and then their friends would see it, right? And other people would be invited to it. And so it looks like you're in this circle of trust in a way, also because we trust our veterans. And then the conversation in there turned toward particular things. Yeah. In addition, if you think about affinity groups and who we relate to, I know that Ori has done a lot of work on what the trolls are doing and the way that they're approaching it. Our group has looked at when they pretend to be military. So when they pretend to be veterans or, service members or whatever, and we find that people respond better when the messages or respond more, if you look over their whole operations, when they're pretending to be military, they get much more response than they do when they don't use that tactic. So not only are they pretending to be us, but then in that way they have access to groups that they can, pretending to be like us. And then they have, these groups that you can join and have conversations in, which is one way of trying to influence. But then also, as you join these groups and as your data is purchased, they have other information about you. And, there's suspicion that the Russians have access to the Cambridge Analytica data, if you remember that whole scandal, which had the voter registration data. It had a lot of our credit card information, not necessarily our accounts, but the things that we bought and our spending habits, our lifestyle kinds of things. And from all of this information that they had, they would build profiles and they would start to tailor messages to people. So not just the Russians, certainly our own American political machine did this as well. Steve Bannon was very involved with those operations. And so they would come out with, information about the upcoming election that was meant to move you in one direction or another based on how they sort of profiled you, this audience segmentation that they were doing based on psychological features.
So go on, Ori.
Yeah, no, most definitely. If I would add something, sometimes they figure out that it would be best to not to push you towards one side or another, but not to vote.
Yeah. So
because that will increase the likelihood of the other side winning. And for the Russians, there is also, for that sort of operation, there is also issue of timing. Timing is election season, but also when, which is a sensitive time that you can essentially influence the trajectory of the next government or its priorities. Suddenly, if the populace is upset because support to Ukraine, the government might change its decision on supporting or not supporting, which would benefit Russia in that case. So there are those sensitive points associated with decision making in the government that you can see those operations happening. And that is relevant all across, in France, in Brexit, in many countries in the Sahel now, where the Russians are very active. It's timing matter here.
So I think I'm beginning to understand this. So is their MO that they build synthetic communities? Like instead of maybe the old model of propaganda was you mimic the news or you mimic science or something. You said, this is what's happening. Hey, Russians, this is what's happening in America. It's great, or your country's bad. But now what they're doing is they're creating synthetic friends. They're like, hey, I'm your friend and I'm a military person. Oh, by the way, the government wants to kill you or something. Is that basically the MO?
They're doing all of it. They're doing all of it. So it's the news, it's the friendships, it's the bombardment with certain kinds of messages so that, you keep seeing or hearing the same thing over and over again. You start to believe it's true. And, Putin in his own approach to this stuff has always talked about the power of deciding what the truth is. And the person who's the most powerful is the one who's defining the truth.
And they're doing this on an industrial scale is what I'm understanding. Just maybe starting with Ori, how is this organized? How do they do this? It's the mass production of all sorts of misinformation. Yeah.
The mass production of fake. So that entire operation started internally. It did not started with the goal of affecting the United States or Ukraine or whatever. It started internally as a way to control information and perception on Putin and his administration. And when my team and I went through all those tweets, a great portion of them, especially at the beginning, are in Russian. And they essentially say how Putin is great and how his administration is awesome and how other countries are awful and how Russia is a great place to live and everything. It's just, it was aimed internally. And interviews with the troll farms, with people that work there, describe this McDonaldization of fake. They took people that they don't have extensive education, and they just told them, this is your quota for the day. You get those topics, you need to go to those forums, and you go to news forums all over Russia and plug in 5 responses or create fake discussion or or create original content or retweet or whatever. And at the same time, you have some operatives that they create fake accounts and that they animate them. There are those who create memes and disseminate them. There are those who decide on the agenda. There are those who specialize in hashtags, those who specialize in video. It became this McDonaldization. So they took individuals with not much training and they create a system that feeds the machine. Now, the moment that they created it and figured out that it's working so well, they start using it in Ukraine around 2014, and they tried to frame the conflict and frame events that were embarrassing for the Russian, like the shooting down of the civilian plane that was associated with the Russians. So they start playing with those things, and later on they expand, and it blew up in 2016 when it received a lot of attention.
Dana, what have you seen of like its organization? Anything to add?
Well, so it's not the Twitter transparency report is what Ori and I have been sort of talking about in the background, where they've identified these foreign actors that have been posting disingenuously on the platform. And so certainly the height of that was 2016. By 2018, they started to get rid of a lot of these accounts, and then more of them cropped up, and then there was more detection because they really cracked down on it. But for the Russians, the two main sources on Twitter of their trolls were the Internet Research Agency, which was sort of outside of the government but had ties to it, but then also the GRU, which is military intelligence, so right inside the government. And so, you have this sort of, internal, but then also farmed out kind of organization. And then there's been some question about, whether these other trolls that they found in other countries were really from those particular countries, or whether they were the Russian trolls, farming their work into these other places to make it harder to detect them. So, and that's an ongoing conversation about those kinds of things. But, certainly what we can take away from this is the Russians are not the only actors in this space. China is also very engaged in their own influence operations with us. And of course, there are other countries as well. And then in some cases, there may be collaboration among these foreign actors when their goals align.
Can you guys tell me a little bit about, we're talking a lot about Russia. I'd love to hear what other countries do. And do we do this too?
So I'm not an expert on the Chinese operation yet, but there has been some work on that. And so while the Russians have been primarily really going after the discord, creating conflict and polarization and all of that, the Chinese, from what I've read, have been much more concerned about the sort of PR appearance of China abroad. So this also goes to their strategy of buying into Hollywood and trying to make movies that show, Chinese heritage and China in a better light. The villains can't be Chinese if the Chinese government is also, the Chinese investors are involved in those films. So this is another piece of this. But when you look at the Chinese influence operation on Twitter, they seem to be looking for likes and retweets. They're writing about lifestyle stuff, cooking, also porn, and, trying to pull people in that way. And it seems like what they're really doing is trying to engage people so that they have their information and can reach out to them in other ways later. Whereas the Russians were really trying to foment, this high emotion. And so, there's been other work on that too. But certainly the goals are very different in those two cases. Also, the Chinese have been very interested in the Chinese diaspora, so people who are abroad, And so a big portion of their influence operation that's not in English, especially, has been aimed at, these people and again, their viewpoint on China.
Yeah, they had a police station in Queens, a Chinese police station in Queens. Ori, do you have anything to add about like other countries involved, or and maybe do we do this too? Like, is this something the Americans do to other countries?
I will just start by saying it is absolutely something that we do. I'm not privy to what that is, but certainly we have a deep and broad background in psychological operations, and if these tools are in use, you can imagine that we're using them as well.
Oh, shoot, Ori, what do you want to say?
Most definitely. Just something to add about the Chinese. Again, the Chinese network looks, behave, and organize very, very differently than the Russian network. What we did in the lab is that we went through thousands of tweets and analyzed the structure of that network, the Russian network. And we saw that there is division of labor. There are those who amplify the message, those who bring external audience into the network. There are those who pretend to be fake news. There are those who are political. In the Chinese network, some of the functions do not exist. They don't play the political. They don't have political trolls. They have something else. And we're still trying to figure out the structure and the division of labor there, because it's very, very off. And that's to add to what Dana was saying. Now, I know that Iranian trolls tried to influence election in 2020. They were very, let's say, very rough kind of attempt to influence. They tried to scare people by pretending that there are other groups in order to make them vote. It was very rough. It was not as sophisticated and slick as the Russian one. It was quite blunt. That's the word I was looking for. And I think that we go back again to the Russian one, first because they're the most active, and second, they are very sophisticated, and there is a philosophy behind it that can be tracked down. But it's important to say that we don't have just states playing in that field. We have also private companies. So
yes,
there was this expose recently with several leading newspapers around the world that highlights the role of cyber operations of Israeli companies. One of those cyber operations was in Burkina Faso to target the Red Cross, creating a fake campaign associating them with terrorist groups and delegitimize them in a way that will allow the client to get rid of them. Wow. So it became a tool, and that tool is out there, and that tool is used politically. We can see that many countries now they hire those companies, or you have states intervening on one actor's behalf, trying to influence the public discourse.
Or you could also think about them as cyber mercenaries whose services are for hire. So, if the Russians are short on people or they want some new tactics, they can try to, coordinate with these other groups.
Yeah, most definitely. And there is something that is really important for us to understand. While in the developed world, you have a lot of safeguards and a high level of accountability for Facebook and Twitter and other social media platforms. Despite the chaos that goes there, there's still high level of accountability. In countries in sub-Saharan Africa, there is no accountability whatsoever, and the market is way smaller. On average, the population is less immune to that sort of intervention, and even the media market is way smaller. So it's very they are more prone to influence. They don't have the immune system that will allow them to fight it effectively. And you can see that in several countries in the Sahel, where suddenly you have that discourse that was injected that weaponized this old notion of French colonialism, and it translates into politics, where the French are being pushed from those countries. Very fascinating development.
There's another piece to this ecosystem as well, which is the economics of it. So, you look at something like Facebook or Twitter or these platforms that sell advertising, and what they need is for us to have our eyeballs on the screen, right? We need to be engaged with content so that we're there to see all of this advertising so they can make that money. And the algorithms really prioritize outrage, so any of this anger and fear-mongering stuff is also stuff that gets us agitated, aroused, excited, and so we're there for it. We're hanging on because we're so upset. The puppies and unicorns do their own thing, but if you really want eyeballs on the screen, they've figured out that it's really about this economy of outrage. And so, the algorithms push the content that's going to make us more upset because it also keeps us online. And so here the companies unwittingly have in some ways been amplifying a lot of this polarizing messaging that's been there, whether it's domestically created or it's foreign, whether it's true content or whether it's fake content, but it ends up getting in front of us at a much higher rate because of the algorithms and the profit motive of these companies.
Dana, how unwitting is it? Is it like really unwitting, or do you feel like the tech companies are like, like a not benign neglect, but like a neglect of it for their own benefit? What's your sense?
I think that this is open for discussion and debate, and that a lot of people will have a lot of different comments about it. And to remember that there are good actors and bad actors in all of these companies, and so it's really hard to say.
Ori, anything to add on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I don't feel that I'm equipped to answer that specific question. But if you allow me to go back to the issue of the production of culture.
Yeah.
One of the things that we saw with the Russian trolls, that at the beginning there were some attempts to create fake event or fake news divorced outside of the discourse. So that they created this very sophisticated hoax that the Columbine chemical plant in Louisiana, that there was an explosion during the anniversary of 9/11, and they associated that with ISIS, and they created fake YouTube clip and fake screenshot of CNN reporting that, and they bombarded the local population in that community with text messages on Twitter, on Facebook. So think about it. The moment that we talk about text messages, it's not the IRA, it's not trolls. We're talking about intelligence agencies doing that, because you cannot just do it very easily. And the idea was to create this panic that would create distrust in the institution, as if they are hiding something. Now, that entire operation failed. It did not get traction. So later on, what the Russians did is that they figured out that they don't need to create fake traumas, fake drama, fake events. They just take what society provides. They take existing tension, existing risks, existing biases, and just amplify it. So they ride on something that is organic to society and just expand it. And we were saying that, Dana, we had those conversations on how as sociologists we study all those biases and all those risks and all those tensions and see those as social problems. So they see them as social opportunities.
Yes.
Opportunities to manipulate, opportunities to expand, opportunity to dig in and to amplify.
And also opportunities to enlist, both in amplification of these messages and then also in, movement to mobilization to action. So, part of this is you can think about what we sort of have tongue-in-cheek been calling a gig economy of influence. We've got these influencers on Instagram and YouTube and TikTok, and they're sometimes making money from these things that they're doing. And if they're not doing that, then at least they're reaping the attention that they get. So, here you have your viewpoint on something, and the Russian message comes through, and in amplifying it or in being amplified by them, there's a sort of system going on where you're now participating in this and you're part of it. And it's feeding you. It's either making you money or it's bringing you more notoriety. And so you're now moving up in this world of influence in a way, right? Mm-hmm. So that's another, if we're thinking about, we were talking about this in terms of cultural production and Becker's art worlds, and this idea that you have the institution or the author of these tweets or whatever the message is, depending on the platform. And then there's there's the platform itself that's doing things algorithmically to push it in some way or to bury it. And then there's the work of the robots, the bots that are on there, and the other trolls and the sock puppets who are, saying what they're supposed to say to make this seem legitimate. And then you have the sort of native population of influencers and others who also could pick these up and run with it and put it out there. And then you can click back to the media outlets, the news media that might support this, but also all of the content producers with podcasts and videos and other things that seem to go along with whatever this original message was. And so you can just see this whole system of cultural producers involved wittingly or unwittingly in the promotion of these different messages.
I'm wondering what's going to happen with AI when you can, when you don't even need as much human intervention to create this type of antisocial content. Like, from what I'm gathering from you guys, these operations kind of operate through parasocial relationships, like where you think you're running into a real person who's trading information, but it's really a government. And it's like, I can imagine a future where people think they have internet friends who they talk to regularly, and it's a chatbot. It's a chatbot.
I think that's definitely something that we'll see in the future if we're not seeing it already. Some of these tweets that are proliferating can be in response to other people, and this could be through AI. The other part of this, going back to Ori's example earlier about the deep fake that the Russians did, right? Now, deep fakes are getting harder and harder to detect. They're getting better and better. And, not only can pictures be manipulated in ways that look real, but also, just a few words from you and your video, and you could be, fake recorded saying almost anything. And it can be very, very convincing. So it's going to be harder and harder to be able to distinguish between, the real things and the fake things as we move into this greater computing power technology kind of world.
Or you got something to add on that, on AI and automated content generation and how it's going to affect things?
Most definitely. So the Russian operation included at the earlier phase bots that it was essentially just repeating same messages thousands of times again and again and again. But if you encounter one of those one time, you think it's convincing. But if you see that again and again and again, you start to be suspicious. And if you just look at the account and see that this is what they produce, and very fast, you figure out this is fake. Later on, they created a host of different messages, but nonetheless, the repetition there, the limitation of the bot was evident and allow us to detect. With the the new chatbot, would be way more challenging. And if we're talking about the even newer chatbot, the chatbot 4, they can produce very convincing, very advanced kind of information. They can harness that tool to produce massive information that will engage and promote whatever you want. And that addressed one of the challenges that they had again and again when they try to promote information in English or in other languages where they don't have enough people that know English or the other languages well. So you could see that they have issues with spelling, issues with understanding humor, issues with whatever. But it seems that the chatbot can't do that work very well. So it's quite dangerous. It's quite a problem.
So, like, what do we do about that? Like, it's easy to feel quite hopeless. Like, I'd imagine we're going to be facing a future where we're going to be getting a steady stream of information and maybe even friendships that we think we have that are with computers that are just feeding us misinformation and trying to turn us on one another. Like, what's the government doing? Do you have any sense of what the government plans to do with it? And well, let's start with that. Is what are we doing about this?
We're not doing a lot. We're not doing a lot. And in some ways, it's also because some of the messaging is self-serving, right? But what we could very easily do is take a very hard look at the algorithms on these platforms, as well as really thinking about user privacy in ways that we haven't. There's much more protection for that in Europe, for example, than there is in the United States. And so some of this micro-targeting with all of this information about us, if we were to close some of that down, it would be harder to get to us directly, but that doesn't solve the problem of the texts that are coming up that are fakes on your phone or any of those kinds of things. So, I mean, if we want to get out of this online disinformation space where we're in these echo chambers with people who believe the same things that we do, where we get surrounded by information that seems to, just keep reinforcing a certain view of things, one of the ways we need to do that is by being in person again. And, some of the conflict we know that we've been having in this country is because of this separation that, you used to go to your workplace and you'd be with people who had different opinions than you did, and you knew them and you respected them. And so you could have a dialogue. Now we're getting all trolled up on these different platforms in many, many ways, right? The anonymity of it makes us nastier. We feel, much more entrenched. We have a slew of people who agree with whatever it is that we want to agree with. And, the connections there are based on this, sharing of this same viewpoint. So, coming out of that internet bubble and back into the world of, interacting with our neighbors and our coworkers and people who are not necessarily exactly like us is one of the things. And also, it's really hard to fake a face-to-face interaction,
Yeah.
unlike you could on video.
Yeah. Ori, anything? The question is what are people doing? Like, how to counteract this?
So yeah, I agree with everything that Dana said. I can tell you that there are multiple tools for detection now. We developed one in the lab, and we know that social media are way more accountable, and they in comparison to before 2016. I'm not saying everything's perfect. So there is that pushback, and there is that awareness. On top of that, studies show that the moment that you train people, inform people on that sort of method, that sort of approach, they are more suspicious. If they suspect something is fake, they would not get so upset by the message, or they won't take that seriously. There were all those experiments that demonstrate that. So it's not without hope. It just, society evolves, and we have a cultural gap and technological gap. Let's hope that we catch up with that and create good enough defense mechanism before it will consume us and we'll get polarized altogether.
Well, and that's where also there's hope. The Finnish case is actually a really interesting one.
Oh, can you tell us about that?
Because they've been the target of a lot of Russian influence operation propaganda for a very long time, even before digital. And so, but they start very, very young in the schools, teaching digital literacy and detection of misinformation and disinformation. And so, the studies coming out of that country show that their citizenry is much less likely to be fooled by these kinds of messages. And so we might want to take a page out of that book as we think about, what we can do to protect ourselves and our national security.
I wonder, so is the future one where we're going to distrust people we don't know and rely more on in real life connections and the local experts on topics, or who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, again, Dana addressed a really important point. For some political actors, this is self-serving. The fact that there is polarization, it also helps them. It's easier. It's not only easier for the Russians to manipulate, it's also easier for them to manipulate and to play their audiences. So as long as that exist, as long as that notion is strong enough, there is an issue here. There is a problem, because polarization, you have to decide: do I go with this side or that side? There is no nuance. There is no gray area. There is no complexity, and that's a problem, because as we all know, the world is complicated. Almost everything is gray, and there is more than one solution or one option. But if we dumb down the discourse, down things and political decisions, it's easier for those who try to manipulate us. It's not good for us.
And this is also part of the erosion of the news media, right? So, we've seen the different newspapers cut their staffs, journalists are overworked. And then in addition to that, they're also getting a lot of their money from online advertisements. So there's a lot of clickbait, there's a lot of spin. It's not clear that the sort of old time journalistic devotion to the truth is as widespread as it used to be. And so, there's no, people used to watch the evening news and have the same kind of story about things. Now we're not watching the same news stations. The news stations don't report the same stories in the same way. And so, there's all these alternate realities in some ways at play. And it's not just social media, it's our entire media ecosystem.
Yeah, the problem is I get the sense that it succeeds because it tells people what they want to hear. Like, the benefit of it is that it's easy to convince because you're giving people what they want.
Right, because we're not going into this looking to be persuaded, and a lot of it isn't actually persuasive. Pauletta talks about this in her work on narratives, and it's not that they're trying to persuade us with the messaging; it's that they're trying to remind us what side we're already on. And so, playing into these aspects of our identity and strengthening them is what's happening. That's what's getting activated as we start to react to the different messages, and we start to mobilize in response to them.
And to add to that, we're talking about that they're entertaining. It's entertainment. They are funny. They are rude. They are mean. And you read it and it's fun. It's funny. Objectively, you can read it, and it doesn't really matter where you are politically. You can get offended, but many of those are entertaining.
Yeah,
and that's part of the engagement. That's part of the appeal.
I remember this is very similar to like the pre-Web 2.0 era, when people were complaining about American media, saying it was terrible. And I was like, there's terrific American media here. But the problem is that most people would prefer to tune into like a guy in a bow tie calling some other guy an idiot or something like that. Like, that's what the people want, more or less, or at least in this environment. So we're almost done. Before we go though, can you just tell us a little bit about like what you're working on, and if anybody is listening and they're an early career person who's interested in information security, can you tell us a little bit, maybe start with Ori, your projects, and a little bit about the center and, that field and where you're working and where people can follow up if they are interested in joining this type of thing.
Excellent. Thank you. So the lab, the Peaceful and Social Conflict Lab, runs a lot of different projects that associated not only with cyber, but also with terrorism and violence, and military security. But the project that we run on the cyber aspect focuses on that massive database of internet trolls associated with countries, mostly with Russia, but not only. And we work with mathematicians and computer scientists, and communication experts, as we try to identify those networks, figure out how they work, how they operate, how they build. As part of the idea is to understand detection, or to develop detection methods. Now, it's really, really important for me to mention that the book that is still in process, it's not just me, it's a collaboration with my former student, Jeffrey Baptist, that he's brilliant, is great, and this is our project. And he's the person that brought me into exploring that world.
And Dana, tell us a little bit about where you're going. You got a big project operating Tell us about it, and if anybody's interested.
Yeah, so I have a very large team of social scientists and computer scientists and data scientists, and we're funded right now by the DoD. And our group calls ourselves the New War Research Consortium. And we're looking at content of a lot of these messages and how it shapes behavior. So not rather than trying to detect the networks, we're looking at the content related to different types of issues and the narratives that are embedded in that. And so we're also looking at susceptibility to influence operations and how to counter them. And then another aspect of our work is on extremism, especially in relation to the military. So that sort of is the large bundle of what we're doing. But really a lot of what we're interested in is how messages move from the fringe to the mainstream, and how they're constructed in ways that move us to act.
Ori Swed, Texas Tech University, Dana Weinberg, CUNY, Queens College. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Annex, a sociology podcast. The Annex is a production of the Queens Podcast Lab. For more information, visit us online, queenspodcastlab.org. Thank you for listening. My name is Joe Cohen. See you next time. Oh, hold on. I didn't even stop it. Ugh.